radius, and let me first focus on role-based access. In the past, if you are familiar with the UCS, or sorry, with the iOS operating system, we had a thing which was known as privilege levels. So there was a concept known as privilege levels. If you log into a router or a switch, you were placed in level 0, where you could basically not do anything unless you got into enabled mode or privileged mode, as they called it, and that was privilege level 15. So 0 was barely nothing except for some very simple show commands and maybe a ping, and 15 was all features. And I could create more privilege levels numbers, so 1 to 15, and assign certain commands to those privilege levels. So that was the iOS way of doing this. With the Nexus, they changed this. So what also was possible was in my radius or TACACS configuration, so TACACS being the Cisco proprietary version of a authentication protocol, I could push these values. I could push a certain number to a user authenticating through me on a radius, and I could push down an attribute saying you are level 14 or you are level 15. So that was the integration. Now with the Nexus, they changed that. And with the Nexus, that also means with the UCS. So with the UCS, we are using a concept known, what everybody's using currently in all its newer equipment, that is known as role-based access control. Or short for airbag, whatever you want to call it. So role-based access control. What this means is that I have a user and I put this user into a certain group, and that group is called a role, or a job role, you can call this. So I put a user into a role. I always have one user in one role. I do not have a user in multiple roles when I log into the system. So I have my user and I place that user into a role, into a certain job role. You are now the system engineer. You are now the consultant, right? You are now the account manager. That is the role that I want to get in. In this role, you can see this as a set of settings that I can either read or write and change. So in that role, I can specify exactly what kind of features, resources, policies, so features that I can edit, if I can edit policies, if I can edit hardware settings, if I can edit management settings, all kinds of features, settings, everything that you can think of. There are certain groups of features that I can assign to a certain role. So a role has multiple assignments of certain features, policies, hardware, all kinds of things. So everything that the user is allowed to do, I assign that to the role, and then I assign the user to that role. And again, that role can be pushed through Radius or LDAP as well. So depending on group membership in Active Directory, or depending on a Radius attribute, I can assign the user into a certain role. Now, what are these roles? There are many pre-configured roles on the system that I can use and that have certain sets of features automatically enabled. Usually in a real-life deployment, I barely need to change this. I usually do not need to change anything about the role-based access control because the roles that I have are pretty much good. Of course, in the lab, you can get questions saying, of course, I want to have access to other things that the system-defined roles do not get me to. Role-based access control is, as I said, a lot of default roles are already in the system. So I personally do not think that you need to change a lot on this because a lot of these roles are already pretty much good to go. The intention of Cisco was, when they developed this role-based access control, is that the networking admins, the storage admins, and the server admins will have separate logins. So for example, I have a storage login, and I have a network login, and I can do some things with my server. So either with the profiling, with the equipment, or with security related features. I can be fully read-only on all the devices. And some other operations managers, where the admin role is the most important role, because the admin role is, of course, someone who can do everything. I can add new roles. I can say add a new role. Let me go back. And say, all right, this is Rick's role. And in Rick's role, I can do all kinds of things with external LAN and external SAN connectivity related to true port configuration, policies and templates, quality of service, or security related features. What can I change in service profiles? So I can limit myself to what I can change in service profiles. I can limit myself in what I can do with actual servers. So do I want to do anything with servers? So am I allowed to reboot them? Or am I allowed to allocate them to service profiles? All kinds of these things. And pod config stands for everything there is regarding a tenant, so regarding an organization. So let's start using these custom roles or these system-defined roles to set some things. So this is exactly how the access that I can get from the system. There might even be some radius privileges that I can set here. Question, is there any option in UCS Manager to use switch macros and EEM features? No, there isn't. That's a very easy answer. There's no scripting inside UCS Manager itself. The way you would use scripting on the UCS is by using PowerShell. So there are very extensive PowerShell extensions for UCS that you can use to write all kinds of applets. So to use your scripting, use the PowerShell plugins that you have, or APIs, or whatever you call them. And with the PowerShell APIs, you can then access the UCS Manager and do everything there. So no EEM or scheduling or anything on the UCS Manager itself. So roles, this predefined set of roles, this is how I'm going to allow my users to do something on the system. Like I said, I can push one of these role names with a user logging in. So the user logging in will get one of these roles assigned. And here I configure the settings per role. I created Rick's role, and Rick's role can do some things here. And of course, if you get one of these questions in the lab, you will be told what the user will need to be doing. But for example, create external port channels. That is the XLAN config. It is pretty self-explanatory. External LAN means uplinks on the Ethernet side. External SAN means uplinks on the storage side. All that stuff. So that is roles. The first part of roles. Because there is more to it. Let's first try a different role based on the local database of users. So currently we only have one user in the database, which is the admin user, and that has the role admin assigned. The role read-only is the default. If I do not specify any other role, it will default back to read-only, because if I configure a user here, probably I'm going to want him to have access to the system, otherwise I wouldn't be configuring that. I can require some password changes here. I can enforce a password strength check. So is there any capital letter in the name? Is there any number or special character in the password? All kinds of things that I can check there. So I'm going to create a new user called user Rick. Its first name is Rick, last name is Mur. These are not required fields. Only the username and the password is a required field. So I'm just going to configure a password saying it is an active account and it will expire in the next few days. So it will expire tomorrow, Sunday, 1st of December. So tomorrow I will not be able to log in anymore. Which role do I want to assign? In this case, I want to assign the networking role to it. And I will come back to locales right away. For SSH, I can even specify a key file or the key data. So I can SSH and even use my SSH keys to log in instead of the password. So very useful there. So I create a user and I go to my browser and I open up another instance of UCS Manager. So I go to 10.10.210.81. Oh, and I disabled HTTP maybe. Oh, I disabled the redirect, I think. This is booting up again. All right, launch UCS Manager, a new instance so I can use another username to access it. Yes, I want to run it. All right, I'm going to use user Rick with the password that I configured. And now I'm logging in. That works, so the authentication was successful. And what I can do now is I can read every setting. So I can go into all of the details and read everything. But I can't do anything here, as you can see. Everything is grayed out. So I can still see everything, so that means that the read-only part is always going to be allowed. So I can see all the settings in the box, except everything related to the LAN tab. So here I can go into my uplinks manager and do things. Close this out. Go away. So anything related to the LAN part, so let's VNIC templates, for example, I can change that. I can change everything related to my networking side, but server side, not a single button that I can access, except of course for the networking part. So if I go into my service profile, I should be able to change something on my VNIC here. I cannot change this, of course, but I can change adapter policies, I can change placement, so I can change some things. So here I can add a new VNIC, for example. So anything related to networking works. So that is role-based access with local database users.